What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Absolute Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Hunt, and I'm back with a solo episode. Man, it's been a while since I did a solo episode, and I didn't even plan on recording this today, but I had a guest planned for this time slot, and we had to reschedule, which happens more than you'd even believe. But it's fine. You know, it's part of just dealing with busy people. I mean, I have to reschedule them on occasion. A lot of the guests have to reschedule them. It is what it is. Gotta flow with it. But I like to keep my day pretty scheduled. I pretty much live by my scheduling app. A lot of my clients know this. A lot of people who've been on the podcast know this. I like to get time slots scheduled, like to plan out my day. I block out a specific time to go to the gym every single day. That way, you know, if you schedule something, you're a lot more likely to be able to get it done. Every night, before, I leave I work from home, so I was going to say before I leave the office, but literally before I leave my home office and go relax or watch Netflix or go to bed, whatever, I make sure I go through my schedule for the next day. I literally write it out on a note paper. This is what I'm going to do first. This is the main priority of the day. After I do that, here's the second thing I'm going to do. At 10:30 a.m., I have a podcast scheduled with whoever from 10:30 to noon or whatever it is. That time slot is blocked off for a podcast. Then at 2:30, I'm going to the gym. From 2:30 to 5 is blocked out for the gym, and so on. And when you do that, at least for me, I'm a lot more productive. And, it's almost, I talked about, it might have been the last solo podcast I did where I was talking about Jocko's book, Discipline Equals Freedom. And that discipline, the amount of discipline you can put into your life, and I think scheduling is a form of discipline. The more discipline you have, the more freedom you actually have. So in turn, it seems wild scheduling your day. And a lot of people who work 9-to-5 jobs might even find this hard to believe that I pretty much set my own hours, but I set hours and I hold myself to those hours that by 7 o'clock in the morning, I like to be working. So whatever I have to do beforehand, I have to get up beforehand and do, because at 7 o'clock I'm starting work or whatever. I mean, the time actually does change, depending on, sometimes it's a little earlier, sometimes a little bit later, but I do have a set time I like to work, schedule out my day. And the more structure you can build into your day, the more freedom you actually have, and the freedom to do other things. Because especially, I think all entrepreneurs, all self-employed people can really relate to this. But if you don't set these standards, don't set the schedule, then your day kind of gets blurred. And work times get blurred into relaxation times. Work times get blurred into training times. If you have a family, it just gets tough. And trust me, I've been there. I've done it. I've screwed it up in the past to where, it seemed like I was so busy. But at the end of the day, I was like, shit, I didn't get anything done. What the hell did I do all day? And then you look and you're all over the place. But if you have a checklist, you have time slots, etc., at least for me, makes me a lot more productive. So the point in all this was I had this time slot blocked off for a podcast. So fuck it, I'm doing a podcast. I'll just do a solo one. And I actually wanted to do a solo one for a while. Just didn't have, because I'm full swing back into recording episodes, as you guys would know. Put out a few episodes recently, some fire ones, and I got a lot more, some awesome guests lined up. If we can ever get them actually to go through with it, but besides the point, have some awesome episodes coming up. But taking this opportunity now to sit down. I don't know how long this might be a quicker episode. Don't really have anything super planned, but I do want to talk about the topic of how to stick to a fat loss diet. And I actually started dieting a couple weeks ago. It's, nothing crazy. I just wanted to lean up a little bit. Want to lean up for summer. When you live at the beach, it doesn't even really matter where you live, but summertime's a good opportunity to lose a little bit of fat. And I've always kind of believed that with the seasons, it kind of presents you a very good opportunity to kind of periodize your physique if you want to. So fall and winter time is a perfect opportunity to focus on being in a caloric surplus and putting on a few pounds, focusing on gaining muscle, focus on gaining strength. Then springtime, start dieting a little bit. And then summer, you just maintain it. And then you kind of makes a full circle. Now, of course, that's depends on everybody's goals. And I actually, for me, most of the time, I pretty much spend 90% of probably the last 6 or 7 years just eating right around caloric maintenance. And I think there's a huge benefit to eating right around maintenance, or even a very small surplus, and just hanging out there for a long time. I think that's a huge benefit. And I think, and when I say that the seasons present a good opportunity to periodize your physique, I do want to clarify that there is an issue with it too. And if you fall into this, if you're listening right now and you fall into what I'm about to say, and I've talked about this before, I've written articles about it, and I've talked about it quite extensively before on the podcast, but this idea of being a chronic dieter, somebody who is always in a diet. I've had clients like this in the past. I've had friends like this in the past. I'm sure people, you might even be this type of person, the type of person that it seems like every time you talk to them, they're always on a fat loss diet. So, and this is the cycle you get into. So you start a diet, you have the goal to lose a bunch of fat. So normally everything goes well for a while, you lose some weight, and then at some point you fall off the wagon. Or you decide that maybe it's not what you want to do, whatever, regardless. So you set a goal to lose fat. You get about halfway through, and then you fall off the wagon. And then you just go back to what you're normally doing. And then you gain all the weight back, maybe even a couple more pounds. And then you realize within a couple months, you want to go right back on the diet. And then the cycle continues, and the same thing happens over and over. And that is not what you want to do. That's actually probably the number one thing. If I actually had to say one nutritional thing that's holding you back from building muscle, from gaining strength, it's that. It's becoming a chronic dieter. It's the number one thing holding you back. And that used to be me. It really did. It used to be me probably mostly in high school. I would say in high school this was me, maybe even like my first year or two in college, because I had this idea in my head, mostly just aesthetically based, that, I wanted to be lean all the time. Just always wanted to be lean. And I thought the way to do that was kind of the bodybuilding method of, you have to do like a big, you got to make it a big deal. I'm in a fat loss phase. Now I'm cutting now. I'm doing, this is like a big deal. And then what would happen is exactly what I just explained. I would start a diet, and then, get halfway through and realize I didn't want to do it anymore, or was okay with only losing a little bit of fat, losing a little bit of pound, a couple pounds here or there. And then I would get off the diet, gain the weight back, maybe gain a couple more pounds, and focus, kind of in my head, I'm like, I'm focused on something else now. But then here it is, like 2 months later, I'm like, yep, I'm going to go back on that diet. And that's just a cycle. You never make any progress muscle building, and you never make any progress strength-wise by doing that. And you also never really lose any fat. I mean, you do for the month or two that you're dieting, but at that point you didn't diet long enough to really make any substantial changes, and you also just put yourself back. You just dieted enough to prevent any real muscle gains or strength gains during that period. So I've kind of changed my opinion a little bit on the idea that you need to, not that you really ever need to cut down. Like, I don't know if there ever really is a need to cut down unless, for pure aesthetic reasons. So you might, I say this realizing that I talked in the beginning here about how the seasons idea, the seasons concept, but I almost feel like it should be you should skip some years from the cutting side. So you should maybe go a couple years of just staying in a nice surplus, right around maintenance, maybe a small little surplus. Do that for a couple years, consistency, build up the consistency, build up some strength, build up some muscle. Shit takes time. And then do a little cut. But then when you do a little cut, you just kind of set your goals, and whatever your goals are, plan it out, And then when the cut's over, boom, you go right back to what you were doing, or you try to maintain it for the summer, whatever you want to do. But when you set your goals, stick to them. So say, hey, all right, I'm cutting for 12 weeks. As soon as it's over, I'm done with it. Or I'm cutting to lose X amount of weight. As soon as that's over, I'm done with it. Like you gotta have a pinpoint stopping point. Because if you leave it open-ended, you have a couple problems. One, when a diet is open-ended, a lot of the time you feel like, this could be just, mostly probably is mental, but you feel like you have time. You always feel like you have time. And that's why and really this goes for training too. This is why I'm huge on putting a date on the calendar. Whether it's a competition, doing a powerlifting meet, setting a specific date to do like a photo shoot or something, or any type of competition, just a date on the calendar. There's a huge benefit to it. It's like when you were in school and there's a date that the project has to be turned in. We all know when did we do the most work? The last week. Always. Probably the last night. Because a task expands in the amount of time it takes by the amount of time that's available. So if you have a seemingly unlimited time to lose weight, it's too open-ended. So Easter comes and it's Easter candy, it's Easter, it's holiday. I'll just go off my diet for a week. It's fine. And hey, it might be fine. But if you're in the middle of a 12-week or 8-week diet, well, shit, dude, you can't lose 1 week out of a 12-week diet. If you do, your results are going to be pretty fucked up, But if it's open-ended, I'll just be off for a week and we'll just continue. But then in 2 weeks, it's someone's birthday. And then in another month, it's something else. And then it just snowballs to the point where you did your 12 weeks and you're like, I didn't make any progress. What happened? It was all those little things. So you didn't have that urgency. You didn't have that date in mind. So there's a huge benefit to that. So if you're going to diet, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I have a goal weight in mind. It's nothing crazy. I'm not even going to really share it with you right now. Maybe because I don't want to be held to it, but put it this way, and this is actually a good point, and then I'll wrap up and get into what I really want to talk about today. And so I have a tentative goal weight in mind, but I have once I hit that goal weight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reevaluate things, and most likely that's where I'm going to stop. But depending on how I look, because I haven't been at my goal weight for this specific cut. I haven't been at that goal weight in a few years, so I don't know. I have a really good. It's like an educated guess that I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna like what that is, but if it's not quite the image that's in my head, that it might be a moving target, which is dangerous and kind of goes against everything I just said. But if you're experienced, you can maneuver that. All right, so what I really wanted to talk about today, and kind of along the same lines, we're going to be talking about fat loss. That's pretty much the topic of the show. But what I really want to talk about was tips to stick to a fat loss diet. Some tips, some little things that, it's something that I find myself talking to clients about a lot. Just the little things beyond the X's and O's. The things beyond, dialing in your macros and weighing and measuring things. And we all know what we should be doing and what we should be eating and following the program, building in that hashtag consistency, all that shit. Beyond that, the little things that might not seem like a big deal, but can really help you out. So the first thing I want to talk about, protein and veggies. Protein and veggies. No matter what diet you're on, aside from the carnivore diet, which, by the way, I've got a lot of great feedback on. That was an awesome conversation with Dr. Sean Baker. If you have not listened to that podcast, go back. It was like 2 podcasts ago. We talk about the carnivore diet, the all-meat carnivore diet. And I've got some questions about that, and I didn't bring them on really because I think that the carnivore diet's an amazing diet and a diet that I'm going to be on or that I even recommend. It's not actually. In fact, it's not a diet I recommend. However, I love learning from everybody, and I even said that on the episode. And the idea that someone has that follows a diet and seemingly is doing well on a diet that is all pretty much red meat is very interesting to me. And I wanted to hear. I had an idea of what his answers were going to be during that entire podcast. I almost felt like a lawyer, because when a lawyer is asking someone a question, a lot of times they know the answer. You know what I mean? They're not just going up there and like asking random shit when someone's on the stand. So when I asked him about the micronutrients and fiber, I pretty much knew his answer, what they were going to be. But I just find it super interesting. Super interesting. Regardless, so I definitely think, even if the idea seems crazy to you, I think you'll learn a few things from that podcast. So go back and listen to it if you haven't already. All right, so back to the things. Tip number 1, protein and veggies. Pretty much every fat loss diet is going to be centered around protein and veggies. Your protein needs, it's obvious why protein's important. Protein's needed for building muscle. It's a huge component of fullness. And protein needs do not change throughout a diet. If anything, the protein needs actually go up when you're dieting on a fat loss diet. The longer you're dieting, the more weight you lose, the leaner you get. But the point I'm trying to make here is protein is going to be pretty constant. It's the only thing that's going to be constant throughout an entire diet. So when you start a diet, when you start a fat loss phase, you start in a caloric deficit, and you have an amount of protein, amount of carbs, amount of fat that you're consuming. And then throughout the diet, once you hit sticking points, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to create a greater caloric demand. And you're going to do that by 2 ways. One, you either increase activity, things like cardio, or maybe add another day of resistance training, etc. You increase activity, or the other option is you decrease caloric intake. And you're going to decrease caloric intake from the energy macronutrients, carbohydrates, and fat. You're not going to ever take away calories from protein. And this is a big mistake that I see some coaches do or some nutrition people do when they base macro numbers off from percentages. And I've had people in the past, coming to me from maybe other coaches, and they show me what they were doing, and I'm like, oh shit, like this is a big problem. It doesn't seem like a big problem, but it's a big problem. So I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say you're on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, and it's 40% protein, 40% carbs, and 20% fat, okay? And then you hit a sticking point, you lower calories a little bit, and then the person's like, all right, well, I'm going to lower carbs a little bit and increase fats, and then it changes the protein percentage to maybe you say you drop it down to 35%, or even if it stays the same, 40% protein, but you reduce, we'll say 400 calories, the protein grams are going to go down. So 40% protein at 2,000 calories is 200 grams of protein. 40% protein at 1,600 calories is now only 160 grams of protein. So you reduced calories, but you lost 40 grams of protein. That's not good. That's not what we want at all. So big mistake there. So protein and veggies. And veggies, the reason I say veggies here is because now I'm not someone who, some coaches and some nutrition people will say veggies are unlimited. You don't have to track them. You just kind of eat. You can have as many as you want. Of course, I feel like you should track everything, depending on your nutrition setup. I mean, if you are tracking things, if that is your nutritional approach, following a flexible type of diet, yes, you should track everything. If you're not tracking anything, well, then obviously it would be different. But veggies, volume is so important when you're dieting. And it's not going to seem like a big issue initially, but the longer you're dieting and the lower calories get, volume's going to be very, very important. And I get this question a lot on veggies. People will say, well, hey, if I'm taking a multivitamin, maybe eating a serving of fruit a day, in hitting my fiber goals, do I really need to eat my veggies if they don't like veggies or whatever? And a lot of times my first answer is, well, you got to define need, because no, technically, if you're taking a multivitamin, you're hitting your daily fiber requirements based off of your diet. You otherwise have a pretty solid nutrition setup. You probably wouldn't need to eat vegetables. You probably wouldn't need to eat your greens. However, if you're on a fat loss diet, and this is actually, kind of backtracking here a little bit. Let's say you're not on a fat loss diet and you're on a muscle building diet. There's actually times where I'm like, hey, you know what? No, you definitely don't need to force feed the vegetables if you're hitting your fiber, taking a multivitamin, have a pretty solid diet, pretty balanced diet, hitting your calories and macronutrient numbers, and you're in a muscle building phase. You wouldn't need to make it a huge priority to smash vegetables. I always think it's a good idea. Vegetables are, always a good idea, but they do promote fullness, and they do have a lot of volume, which, for the exact reason why they're good on a fat loss diet, can prevent the hunger or the ability to hit the calorie goals depending on how aggressive your muscle building phase is. So it's pretty much the opposite on a fat loss phase. There will be a point, if you're losing fat, if you're on a fat loss diet, there will 100% come a point where you're hungry. There definitely will, 100%. Might be the first day. Might be the very first day you're on a diet. Actually, the first week a lot of times is the most hungry you'll feel for a while, is that first week. That first week or two on a diet, you can learn a lot about somebody. You really can learn a lot about somebody the first 2 weeks, because it's going to be uncomfortable. Especially if it all depends on where you're coming from, especially if you're somebody who wasn't really paying a lot of attention to their nutrition, and then you jump on a fat loss diet where you're being pretty strict, building in that consistency, tracking things, weighing, measuring, etc. It's gonna feel terrible that first week. You're gonna be hungry, you're gonna be struggling, you're gonna be doubting yourself, questioning yourself, and you're gonna want to quit. And you're 2 weeks in because you're like, how can I go months doing this? I have so much weight to lose. In that first week, you might not even lose that much. You might only lose like a couple pounds. You're like, oh shit, I just killed myself this week. And it was my first week. Should be the easiest. And it was really hard. And I only lost a couple pounds. Or maybe didn't even lose any weight, depending on, how it was set up. It's very easy to quit. And then it could be that. Or, some people just have very smooth sailing for the first few weeks, first couple months even, and then the point comes where it's like, okay, now I'm hungry. What do I do? And the first thing I normally say is you got to increase your green veggies. Things like romaine lettuce, spinach, even broccoli, things like that. Green, pretty much any green vegetable is fair game there. And think of it this way. All right. And this is something I even started doing now that I'm dieting. This is a old Matt Ogus trick. When you go to Chipotle. So, big Chipotle fan. I love Chipotle. And you know it's real when there's 3 layers to my Chipotle. When I'm not really worried about, I'm never really not worried about my nutrition. But when I'm what I'm normally in 90% of the time, just eating at maintenance or a slight surplus, I always just go with my classic burrito. I'll just always get a burrito because I'm not really worried about, because I have enough calories and carbs and fats to make pretty much anything fit. So if I have a burrito, it's not like it's going to screw up the rest of my day. It's not like I'm going to have to skimp the rest of the day. So that's like my number one go-to. When I start dieting, or even when I start paying attention to my nutrition and making sure I'm really dialing things in, most of the time I'll go with a bowl, just because it's, less carbs, less calories, and it can make the rest of my day a little bit easier. And then when I'm really dieting in a fat loss phase, which is where I'm at now, where I'm dialing everything in, really paying attention to the hunger for meals and trying to set up my day in a way to where I mitigate that and make it as easy as possible for me to stick to it. I'll order my normal bowl, double meat chicken, my normal bowl, white rice, load up on the fajita veggies, hot salsa, have them throw a little bit of lettuce on. But then I take it to go. I go home and put it in a huge bowl. I take like the biggest bowl we have, and I load it with romaine lettuce. Then throw the Chipotle bowl on top of it. And then I ask the Chipotle people to give me a little bit extra of the hot salsa, and I put a little bit of extra hot salsa in there, stir it all up, boom. Now that is a ton of volume. So you added pretty much what I do is I just add a ton of romaine lettuce to it, and which is hardly any calories. There's a little bit of carbohydrate, a little bit of fiber. That's about it. And in turn, you get so much more volume and fullness. It's a little trick, and these are little things. It's not like, this is like a revolutionary idea. It's pretty common, pretty obvious, I guess you could say, if you're pretty familiar with nutrition, that you add in some green veggies. They're low calorie, have some fiber in them. Just the density, the volume there is going to be good. And that goes for any meal. Just adding a salad. Just even if you're going out to eat when you're on a diet, always order a salad. Even if your meal doesn't come with it, ask for a salad. And then of course you also got to be careful with salads. Is you don't want to just order it normally and then get 1,000 calories worth of dressing and toppings added to it. Just make sure whatever you get, try to get like a lighter dressing. Always get it on the side, and then you can kind of see what's on it. I mean, if there's a bunch of shit on it, cheese and all this stuff, bacon and that, you can. I mean, depending on your diet, but for the purpose of what I'm talking about right now, try to get just as plain of a salad as possible. Just the greens, cucumbers, tomatoes, all the vegetables, just greens and vegetables, load it up, and then have a little bit of dressing on the side. Start your meal with that. Boom. Every time you go out to eat, every single time. That'll do a lot for you. Just that alone. And then when you're at home, you should always have some romaine lettuce. Try to have some type of green vegetable, really just a high nutrition, low caloric density vegetable with every single meal when you're dieting. That should just become a staple, that you're having a vegetable with every meal when you're dieting. That's going to go a long way with hunger. And the second thing here, and this is kind of the same point, but fiber. Fiber's very good for satiety, very good for fullness. So when you're choosing carbohydrate sources beyond vegetables here, we're talking your starchier carbohydrates, fiber's something to think about. It's something to think about. It's not the end all be all. And even kind of going back to the podcast I had with Dr. Sean Baker, he on a carnivore diet, there's no fiber, so that was a big question. And one of the things we touched on, and he talks about a lot, is just the need for fiber might be overblown. It might be a little bit overblown. And it's something that I've kind of talked about with clients for a long time, is that fiber is something that it's very common in all things, but especially nutrition, supplements, fitness, that when something's good, it's very easy for the media and just the general public to think that if a little bit's good, then a lot has to be really good. And that's not the case. It's not the case at all. So in terms of fiber, it's like, okay, well, it was popularized to being all this, to helps lower cholesterol, is good for all these things, digestive health, GI health, all this stuff. Keeping us regular. Fiber's amazing. It's a great thing. So people just started eating fiber everything. Fiber One made fucking fiber, enriched everything. And it's good and tastes great. And then people just started, it became like a test. It's like a game. Well, how much fiber I can get. And then you get into the idea of net carbs, which I've talked about this on the podcast before as well. I'm not a huge believer in net carbs, because the idea, so I guess I should explain that. So the idea of net carbs is you have a food item, let's say it has 30 grams of total carbohydrate in it, but it has 10 grams of fiber. If you subscribe to the net carb idea, you would track that or think of that as only having 20 grams of active carbohydrate, because the 10 grams essentially, based off from this theory, would have no nutrition value, no caloric value at all. It would just like take away the carbs. And that's just not true. It hasn't been shown. Fiber does contain calories. It might not be 4 calories per gram like other carbohydrates. It might be more 2 or 3, but last time I checked, 2 or 3 is still not 0. So it doesn't make sense to me net carbs, and it just overly complicates shit way more than it really needs to be. Yeah, so that was kind of sidetracked a little bit there. But so when it comes to fiber, it became like this big game to where everyone was just like, okay, fiber is good now. I'm just going to eat as much fiber as possible. And of course, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. That's not good. It's not a little bit of fiber, like too little fiber can be an issue, but way too much, like anything, can also become an issue. And you lose some absorption of minerals, some other micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. And then you also get, so not enough fiber causes problems to your GI tract, but then too much fiber becomes a problem for your GI tract. So it is something that you don't want to just have an abundance of, but again, when you're on a fat loss diet, you probably are going to want a little bit more fiber just from the fullness effect of it. And most fiber foods tend to be more voluminous and more nutrient dense. So it's not calorically dense, it's nutritionally dense. So the amount of nutrients, macro or micronutrients per caloric volume. So, for example, something like if you have 100 grams of carbs to use in a day, you're going to get a lot more nutrition, a lot more fullness from eating carbs from fruits, vegetables, maybe like a sweet potato, something like that. Get your 100 grams of carbs from that versus 100 grams of carbs from, something like like 2 Pop-Tarts. Mind you, I'm a big fan of Pop-Tarts. Actually, I haven't been eating Pop-Tarts in a long ass time. I've fallen off the Pop-Tart bandwagon. That used to be my shit back in the day. But yeah, so like 2 Pop-Tarts would be, like 75 grams of carbs. So you could have 2 Pop-Tarts and have 75 grams of carbs. Or you could have fruits, vegetables, other fibrous carbohydrates, and get a lot more fullness. And that's not saying you could never have other things. That's not what I'm saying at all. Not what I'm saying at all. 100%. That's the idea of flexible dieting is the fact that you can eat, within reason what food choices you want. But when you're on a fat loss diet and caloric restriction, you do want to prioritize things that, like fiber, the fibrous carbohydrates, the things that promote a little bit more fullness. So to kind of wrap this concept up here, when you're dieting, every meal has a protein source, obviously, and a vegetable source. And that's how you build pretty much every meal. Just start building every meal that way and then go from there, depending on what your overall structure of your diet is, whatever your overall macronutrient needs are. But every meal starts with some protein, starts with some fibrous vegetables, and then you go from there. You do that, it's going to go a long way for your fullness. Long, long way. And this brings me to the second point. Again, I'm going to talk a lot about because these are the hacks. These are the nutrition, the little details of nutrition when you're on a fat loss diet that I think can help you. So I don't want to get the wrong opinion that I'm talking like, okay, you got to eat like the super, super clean diet here. But remember, I'm assuming you're going into this kind of having an idea about nutrition. This isn't just like a podcast going over all the basics here. This is a podcast for you. You've been dieting for a while. You know what you're doing nutritional wise, but you're on a fat loss diet and you're having trouble sticking to it. These are the things. So the second thing I want to talk about here is avoiding hyper-palatable foods. So these are the things that cause problems in a diet. See, these are the classic things, the classic foods that make it hard for you to stick to your numbers or stick to your diet. We all know what they are. Pizza, cookies, candy, chips, ice cream, french fries, soda, beer, other alcoholic drinks, whatever. The things that are very easy to overconsume. I'm going to tell you a story. So I was doing amazing on my diet. And then Easter came around. And I'm not somebody who like I'm super disciplined. So if I'm on a diet, I'm on a diet. It's pretty much not really going to be a problem for me. But Easter came, and of course, with Lucy, my daughter, we got her a bunch of candy. The grandparents got her a bunch of candy. So then we had all this candy in the house, bunch of candy. And the problem is, this would be like a child's dream, but the problem is Lucy's not. She's not really big on candy. It's funny. I get questions all the time. People ask me like, "Oh, Kyle, are you like super strict with your daughter on nutrition? Are you do you have like your nutrition structured out or anything?" And the answer is no, I don't. I actually surprise myself at how little I don't want to say pressure, but how little real structure I put towards her nutrition. However, we live pretty healthy, obviously. We live healthy. We don't have a ton of junk food in the house at all. We just don't buy the stuff. And we always have good foods available. And I feel like that's a better way about trying to instill good nutritional habits in a child. And I'm not here trying to give parenting advice, but I think when you just provide good things and just don't have a lot of option for bad things, they develop the good habits. So Lucy, for example, like 90% of her diet is really good. Like she'll eat a lot of times in the morning. She'll eat oatmeal with me if I'm eating oatmeal that day. Greek yogurt, blueberries, apples, bananas. She's even started to eat steak recently. That was something that she never really did. She's eating steak now. Her idea of a snack is like snacking on just plain Cheerios. So she's a pretty healthy kid. Of course, she has the kid foods too. She'll eat hot dogs and eat French toast and stuff like that. But we don't buy a lot of candy or junk food like that too much. So she has all this candy, and she's like not even eating it. So it's funny. We're like, Lucy, come on. Do you want some of your big ass Easter bunny? Do you want to have a bite? No, thank you. Here, Lucy, do you want this chocolate Easter egg? No, thank you. Or if she does, she'll have like a bite of it. So, here's me. I'm like, well, shit, I don't want this stuff to go to waste. So I started, having some and just kind of like fitting it into my diet. Like, I'll just take away some carbs, take away some fats, and I'll have some of this Easter candy. And then all of a sudden, literally like overnight, like the next, like after like 2 days of this, I'm like, holy shit, now I'm like starving and I'm wanting to eat this damn Easter candy. Like it's just, here I go. Like this is just, and obviously it's not like a huge surprise. Like, okay, yeah, you started getting more you're getting like a couple hundred calories from, actually it's probably even more than that, like a bunch of calories from this Easter candy. And there's really nothing in it just besides carbs, sugar and fat. So it's taking up a solid chunk of your caloric needs for the day, your caloric goals for the day. And it tastes amazing. Like it's really good stuff. Because actually we got like really good. It's not like just your cheap candy. Like a lot of it was Sarah's candy, if you know what that is. It's like really like it's good chocolate. It's good shit. And it's just like, again, it's just something that it's once you get eaten, it's very easy to overeat it. And it just kind of like brought up this point to me. It's like, oh man, like again, this is somebody who, I've been touting flexible dieting for years, like way back since like 2011, like for 7 years. But there are limitations to it. There definitely are limitations to it, especially when you're dieting. So sometimes it's better to just avoid that shit. Avoid the stuff that causes problems. If you know that having candy in the house or having ice cream in the house is going to make it hard for you to stick within your macronutrient guidelines, sometimes it's better just to avoid it 100%. Or make it like a special occasion. I'm not saying like a cheat meal or free meal. I'm just saying, okay, one day a week I'll go out and buy 1 pint of ice cream or something, and then I'll split it with my significant other, and I'll make that fit my macros versus just always having ice cream at the house. just always having it and always having the option to have it. Like every day, you're like, oh, well, so throughout the day, you're like, well, maybe I should save like 500 calories for nighttime so I can have that ice cream, and that works. That definitely works. People can do that. But there comes a point where that can hold you back, and that can definitely hold you back. And I think that the issue so much isn't the foods themselves. Like I don't want to make it seem like here I am talking like, oh, you gotta eat clean and you can't have any junk food. That's not what I'm saying. 100% not saying that. I'm just saying that we all know what problem foods we have are. For me, I don't really have a ton of foods that I crave. Like I'm not someone who really craves food per se, but I do know if I have food available to me that it can be a problem. Like if I don't have the food available to me, I won't even want it. Like I'm not even going to be craving it. I'm not going to be really desiring it all that much. But if I have it available, if it's in the house, then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, well, shit. Yeah, I can make that fit. I'll make that fit. I will. Versus if, and I still have all the other foods that my diet is pretty much based around, but I'll just start substituting away from those into the better tasting stuff. It's human nature, but I know that and I'm aware of that. So to me, it's not even so much about being flexible as it is just about being aware that, okay, I probably shouldn't be flexible with these things. My flexibility should be in other areas of my diet. And then if I do want something beyond the basics, I'll just go out and I'll have to get it. I'll add another step to where I don't have it at hand. It's not part of my daily or weekly grocery haul. But if I do want some ice cream, if I feel like some ice cream, then I'll just drive to the store and get it. And then I'll make it fit. And then once it's, I'll buy a little pint. Once it's gone, well, then it's gone. And then we're right back on the basics here. I just think that avoiding the problematic foods, and sometimes this kind of goes into the idea of that I also want to talk about is being prepared. I think this is, if I had to list a habit of that the majority of my most successful clients had in really anything, but especially fat loss, it was taking the time to prepare for their week's nutrition. And this could mean meal prepping, in the classic sense of meal prepping, like going and buying all the stuff and then spending 2 days a week, whether it's Sunday and Wednesday or Monday and Friday, whatever, and then making up all their meals and putting them in Tupperwares and shit. Yeah, that could be it. But I'm not even really talking about meal prepping per se. I'm literally talking about making sure they go to the grocery store every, it's more like going to the grocery store every Sunday and Wednesday than it is actually meal prepping. It's making sure you have the foods available to you. That's so important. You have to make sure you have the foods available to you. So that means that you're going to have to go to the store very regularly. You're going to have to go grocery shopping. You're going to have a list of stuff prepared ahead of time. You're not going to just go to the store and then wing it and say, all right, I'm going to just buy whatever I think I need, not what I'm actually definitely 100% going to need. So you have to plan it out a little bit. You have to say, okay, well, if I'm eating 8 ounces of chicken every single day, well, let's do the math on that. How much chicken am I going to need this week before I go to the store again? If you're eating, if you're eating 2 sweet potatoes a day or 1 sweet potato a day, how many sweet potatoes do I need for the week before I go back to the grocery store? Same for fruit, same for vegetables, et cetera, et cetera. Because what happens is, this is very common, people do great when they have the food available to them. But as soon as they don't, they go off the deep end. They have to order food, or they stop at a restaurant, or they just, fall back onto, well, I don't have the food I need for my diet, so I'll just eat this junk food instead. That's very, very common. And it's something that, we all do it. We all do it. So you have to be prepared. You really have to be prepared. And this, especially if you're someone who travels for work, it's just another extra layer, of shit you have to do. But hey, that's what's required. That's what's going to be required. Like, you can't just leave stuff for chance. I think a lot of times in the early stages of flexible dieting, this was one of the things we used to promote it. And it's still something I use to promote flexible dieting. Like, it's not a meal plan, so you can be flexible. You can go out to eat and still stick to your diet. You can change food sources, can change protein sources, carb sources, fat sources, etc., and still stay on the diet. That's a huge selling point. However, don't get it twisted. Don't think that just because you're on a flexible diet, I'm going away for a few days on business, I don't really have to think about what I'm going to eat. I'll just wing it. Because then you get in a situation where, all right, well, you're stuck at an airport and you didn't bring any food, so now you got to go buy, spend a bunch of money to buy whatever it is you need, or you're stuck at a hotel and doesn't have any, can't get what you need, so then you end up eating just a couple bags of chips from the gift shop or whatever. Like, hey, you got to think ahead. You just got to think ahead and be prepared. It's a huge, huge component of the dieting process. So we've talked about protein, talked about the benefit of veggies and fiber, talked about avoiding the hyperpalatable foods, the foods that it's very hard to stay in the serving sizes. Even a lot of like quote unquote healthy foods, I would categorize under, the hyper palatable, the idea that it's very hard to stay within the serving size. Something like cereal. This is what I talk about, like with lay people all the time, like people who aren't really into the fitness industry, but they're, I'm talking about like probably like your parents or your aunts, uncles, like your relatives that, they every year they probably want, they ask you about work, because you work out, they ask you about dieting, like, I want to lose a little bit of weight, and then I've been eating really good, but I'm not losing any weight. And then you are like, oh, what have you been eating? And then they're like, well, I wake up, have coffee, have, my cream and sugar, have a couple cups of coffee with my cream and sugar. And then I have a bowl of cereal. And then I have, X and X and on. And then you look at it and you're like, all right, well, I can kind of see what the issue is. And like, well, what was the issue? I'm eating so healthy. It's like, all right, well, here's the deal. Like, first off, you start out with a bowl of cereal in the morning. It was probably like whatever the cereal is, even if it's a more of a quality brand, like from a macronutrient standpoint, like something, relatively decent macros on it. But did you have one serving? No. Probably didn't even have 2 servings. No. You probably had like 3 or 4 servings of the cereal. And then you threw on a bunch of milk. And then you probably had something, even then a banana with it. Like, you think you had like this great breakfast, but it was 1,000 calories. And it was like majority carbs. So that was what you ate. And then you went to and had maybe like a Subway foot-long sub for lunch. And then you came home and had like a normal dinner. Like, to your average person, they're thinking, oh, I ate really good today. It's like, I ate really good. I'm on a diet. But then you look at it and it's like, oh, it's the same amount of calories you were always eating. It's just distributed a little bit different, and it's kind of disguised as being, quote unquote, more healthy, but it's really not. Like, you ate the same amount of calories and just distributed them differently. So again, these are type of the things that, it's very hard to, if you go on a diet and you don't track anything and you don't really think of nutrition as being something that you need to manipulate, but all you do is say, all right, I'm just going to eat a bunch of green veggies at every single meal, you'll probably initially lose weight. I'm talking to your average person here, not someone who's a hard-charging athlete or training and or really has their nutrition dialed in. Just talking about your average person. There are some things, like, okay, if you just add a bunch of green veggies to every single meal, you're going to eat less. Okay. If you have a lean protein source with every single meal, you'll probably end up eating less calories that way. So that's kind of what, the first couple things, we've been talking about during this podcast. It's kind of the idea here. And it does expand into people who are more serious about nutrition. The same things apply. It's just you have to be a little bit more detailed, a little bit more tracked about it. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, I'm actually really excited to talk about it because it's not something I really ever did really paid attention that I did per se, but I always kind of did it, and that's intermittent fasting. And there's a bunch of modalities for intermittent fasting, a bunch of different methods of alternating your eating with not eating. I think maybe one of the first books that made it popular was The Warrior Diet, and that one's a little screwy. If you actually read the book, it's not even really technically fasting per se, because he says you can eat like fruits and vegetables and protein during the fasting window, which it's not really fasting, and it's only really one meal regardless. So there's that, and then there was eat, stop, eat, and then there's like a bunch of different alternating, you don't eat for a day, eat for a day, and then a bunch of different things. But the most popular one in the fitness realm tends to be the lean gains method, which is alternating 16 hours of fasting, of no eating, with 8 hours of feeding and eating window. And that one seems to be most popular. And that one I think is most applicable to fitness people. And so I'll just explain it a little bit. I'll just explain how I use fasting and the benefits. So I've never really been someone who really thought of, okay, I'm being strict with intermittent fasting. However, I've always kind of ate dinner a little bit earlier. Not really actually ate dinner earlier, but just like my last meal of the day was semi-earlier, meaning I didn't eat at like midnight. If I go to bed at midnight, I probably didn't eat at midnight. I probably ate at like 7:30 or 8. And then when I wake up in the morning, I like to have a couple cups of coffee and I get right to work or get right to whatever I'm doing. So I don't eat right when I get up. I normally wait a few hours. So a lot of the time, I was maybe eating dinner. We'll say my last thing I ate was, we'll say 8 p.m. And then I would wake up, get to work, drink some coffee, wait until I got hungry, and then I would eat breakfast at like 10 a.m. So that's like 14 hours right there. That was like a 14-hour fast without even thinking about it. And and that's pretty doable for most people. I think that's really doable. I think really when it comes to fasting, anything from 12 to 16 hours is pretty good. And I think 12 hours is a good starting point, because I think that's something that everybody can do. And of course, and really when we get into, I could probably do a whole podcast on intermittent fasting, but I don't think that there's any real, there's not real secret to it. Like there's no hidden benefit per se. There is some interesting research on it, but I think just when you limit your feeding window, when you limit the amount of time throughout a day that you're eating, it does make it easier to limit your calories. So if you are following on a fat loss diet and you expand the time you don't eat, your fasting by just a couple hours, and you limit your eating window, it does make it easier to stay on your numbers, stay within your caloric intake numbers. So basically what I've been doing lately is really I kind of just expanded a little bit from what I already do naturally. So at nighttime, I didn't really change anything. My last meal is usually around 8, sometime, maybe a little bit later, but around 8. And then I normally don't eat my first meal until, 11:30, 12 the next day, sometimes 11 to 12. So I'm getting about 15 to 16 hours of intermittent fasting per day, and just eating. So I'll have my first meal around between 11 and 12. And then I'll normally have like a shake or something very small, like a protein shake, maybe like an apple as a second meal right before the gym. And then when I get home from the gym, I'll normally have, just I'll have a normal meal at like 5:30, and then I'll have my last meal around 8. So it's like three main meals with a shake, and that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. So actually, I haven't really been doing my classic #consistency breakfast of eggs, oatmeal, and fruit. Like I haven't really been doing that lately, just because I've noticed that as I've pushed my first meal only really back like an hour or two, I've just like said, all right, well, screw it. I just won't have eggs. I'll just have like whatever my second meal normally would be. So I'm starting normally with just like some chicken and rice and some like green veggie and maybe like a half a serving of a fruit. Or then normally some fat source, whether that sometimes I'll throw in, sometimes it's actually a couple whole eggs, sometimes it's bacon, sometimes it's just almonds or some peanut butter or something. So it's, a pretty hefty size first meal. And then I'll have like I said, a shake normally as my second meal. Then my third feeding will be pretty good sized. And then my last meal is normally just, I'll have, whatever I need to hit my macros for the day. But a lot of times recently it's just been like a pretty good sized steak. Like I have a pretty big steak and some form of vegetable, whether it's a salad or just broccoli, asparagus, something like that. And then at that point, I just kind of evaluate what my macros are and adjust it. Sometimes I'll have a little bit of carbs, but a lot of times I've been, having more carbs earlier in the day around training. And then by my last feeding, it's mostly just protein and fats that I need. And that's been working pretty well. That's been my diet lately. And I think that the intermittent fasting component of it has helped me a little bit, just from, like I said, from reducing the feeding window time. It's made it to where the only really time, and I think this is important here, is it kind of just consolidates your hunger. And especially when you first start it, you will be hungry in the morning. And, it's something that you have to get used to. And I actually, once you get used to it, it does subside a little bit. But I think it just consolidates the hunger. So if you still have your normal, whatever you would normally diet on, the same diet, it's just you fit it all into 8 hours, we'll say. In the morning time is really the only time that you're going to have to battle the hunger. And if you stay busy, if you're working, and I think caffeine's important here too. At least it's helped me a lot. You have some coffee or whatever, so you get woken up, and actually caffeine it can blunt hunger a little bit. But for me, it's just I almost don't even want to stop working in the morning, so it doesn't. It's not like a big deal. Like it actually makes me more productive earlier in the day because I don't have to stop to make breakfast. I don't have to stop at when normally like 9:30 or 10. What I would normally do, I just bump it back a couple hours, and I can be super focused from, we'll say, 7 in the morning to noon, and then when I get the majority of my work done, and then I actually get hungry, and then if I'm ready to eat, and I deal with the hunger a little bit. Make my first meal, it's great, and then get back to work, get ready, for the rest of my day. But I think this idea of hunger, I think it's important. The more I think about this, because if you would ask me what a big problem is, or a big reason why people end up falling off their diet, a lot of times I just say, yeah, it's just they get hungry and they get presented with better tasting food, and boom, they're off their diet. Like hunger is normally the driving force to it. If you really boil it down, a lot of times it is hunger, because think of it this way. You're a lot more likely to eat a bunch of junk when you're hungry or starving than it is when you're full and satisfied. When you're full and satisfied, and you're presented with, it's like when you go out to eat and you eat a good sized dinner, and then the lady comes out and she's like, hey, did you make room for dessert? A lot of times you're like, no, like I don't want it. But if you're presented with it right off the bat and you're like completely starving, like, oh, here, well, it's like the bread when they bring out. Like you go out to eat at a restaurant and they bring out the bread. When you're starving, you're going to eat it. It's very hard to say no to the bread when you first get there and sit down and you're starving and you're like, holy shit, they can't bring out my dinner fast enough. I'm going to eat this bread. But if they brought the bread out when you're done, like after you finish eating, like, oh, here's our compliment bread and butter. You'd be like, oh, I don't want that shit. Like, get that out of here. What's the point? What's the point of this? You know what I mean? Kind of that concept. It's kind of that concept here of when you're hungry is when the problems are going to arise. However, like I said earlier, every diet you're on, every fat loss diet is going to have some form of hunger. You're going to have to learn to deal with it. If you want to be successful dieting, you have to deal with your hunger. You're going to have to deal with it. So, recognizing that, being one with that, understanding that, okay, I'm going to be a little bit hungry. If we can consolidate it to the morning time, okay, the mornings, guess what? You're going to be a little hungry. And if you can stay busy and deal with it, okay, I get through that. Now I'm on with my day. And hopefully the rest of the day is a little bit easier. So it's not for everybody, the concept of intermittent fasting. I don't think it should be for everybody. But it is one thing that I think people should at least try. You should at least give it a shot. And depending on your schedule, I mean, if it doesn't work for your schedule or whatever, then I get that too. But you don't, if you have to eat in the morning for whatever reason, you can do it the other way around. I think it's a lot harder the other way around, meaning if you wake up and eat and then you cut off your meals at, I don't know, like early afternoon or like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I think socially that's hard because if you think about it, one thing, most people are like, when do we socialize? When do we have our largest meals most of the time? It's dinner. It's dinner time. Friday night, you go out with your significant other, you go out with friends. That's when you're going to have a meal out. That's when you're going to have maybe a couple drinks. It's going to be nighttime. It's not going to be, very rarely is it, maybe outside of special occasions where it's like, I'll go out for a big breakfast. Very rarely do you do that. Normally, most people just eat quick breakfasts at home or on their way to work or at their office or just a quick little breakfast. Why don't we just skip that? Why don't we just skip that? Skip that meal. Or at least push it back a couple hours, and it might not even really affect your day all that much. But because you pushed it back, you pushed some of those calories back. Now you'll have more calories to eat later. Just an idea, just a concept, and I think it's something that I told my newsletter. I let the cat out of the bag on the newsletter, which if you're not subscribed to my newsletter, I will put a link in the show notes for you to check that out. I think there's a ton of value there. I've talked about it in the past, but I let the cat out of the bag on my newsletter that I have actually started writing the diet book I've wanted to write for a long time. And it's very comprehensive. I've been having a lot of fun writing it. And it should be out. I don't even want to say when it should be out because I still have a lot of work to do on it. But I do talk about intermittent fasting a little bit. It's not the main component of the diet. It's not an intermittent fasting diet or anything like that. It's really not any type of quote-unquote diet. It's more just a nutrition playbook. It takes you where you are and kind of tries to meet you where you are and gives you a map with a bunch of different options to get to the final destination. So it's not just a very rigid, like, oh, this is your calculations and this is how you have to eat and this is what you're going to eat for this meal or anything like that. It's just a framework. It's almost like one of those books where if you pick the story, you get by what page you go to. Remember those when you were a kid? When you were reading a book and it said if you go to page 32 or 46 and it kind of just took the story any way you wanted based off from that. That's kind of how the book is. That's kind of how the book's going to be. Takes you where you are, gives you a bunch of options to go from point A to point B. So yeah, cat's out of the bag. That's coming out probably later this year. I don't want to give any more specific dates, but later this year. And I also have a second edition to Absolute Strength, the Absolute Strength book. Second edition of that coming out as well. All right. I think I've rambled long enough. Rambled a lot on this podcast. Rambled a lot on this one. It's been a while. I feel like I'm deconditioned for solo podcasts. It's a skill. It's definitely a skill that you lose if you don't do it. Yeah, I think interviewing itself is a skill you lose. But I think I've gotten a lot better at that. And I've been I think I get better until you hear someone who's really good at it. A lot of times it seems like radio is kind of dead, but I do like listening to sports talk radio a little bit. And those guys are professionals. I mean, they think of it, they do it, all day, every day. But those guys are good. Like when they interview people, they very rarely ever talk over them. They ask very good questions. Their voice inflection is always on point. You learn a lot. It's just, I love podcasting, and I just love learning about new things. There's just something about education and learning and growing as a person in all areas. I think it's very important. You should always try to learn new things, whether it's, kind of goes along the lines of your hobbies that you normally have, or your career, or whatever, or if it's completely outside of that, which I don't do a very good job of. I'm pretty focused in on kind of one realm of topics, but something I want to work on. All right, that's all I have for you guys. Hope you enjoyed this one. The podcast is going to be on fire coming up. Got a lot of big episodes. I want to do some more solo ones. I want to just put out a ton of content and continue having fun with it. All right. If you enjoyed this one, make sure you let one of your friends know about the Absolute Strength Podcast. If you want to leave a review, I would greatly appreciate it. If you want to hit me up on social media at Hunt Fitness, always love interacting with people, especially when they tell me that they enjoyed the podcast. All right, until next time, peace. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Absolute Strength Podcast. I know I had a ton of fun producing it for you. And before you go, if you could just drop me some feedback, I'd love it. I love reading your feedback. So you can go over to iTunes, leave a 5-star rating, write a little review, what you think of the podcast. I absolutely love it. I read every single one. But it's cool if you don't want to do that. I get it. No one wants to really go out of their way to do anything, let alone write a review. But I want to get your feedback. So drop me a line on Instagram at Hunt Fitness, or on Facebook, Kyle Hunt, or on Twitter, or send a pigeon or something. I don't know. I just want to hear your feedback. So if you want to give me some feedback, let me know what you think. Hit me up on Instagram at Hunt Fitness. And before you go, I have one last thing I want to say. I have a program I want you to check out. It's actually called the Absolute Strength Program, and the link is in the show notes. It's a program I designed to help increase my own squat, bench, and deadlift. And I got pretty strong off of it, and I think you're going to like it. It's a great book. Thousands of people have got amazing results from it. It's in the show notes. All right, guys. Until next time, until next episode, peace.